Hi, I'm Juliette Wolf-Robin. I'm National Executive Director of American Photographic Artists. APA is a not-for-profit association of professional photographers, mainly who work in the advertising and editorial sectors. Our mission is to advocate, educate, and elevate the photographic community, and we do that through programming like this. If you are a member, then thank you for being a member of APA. And if you're not already a member, please reach out to me, Executive Director at apanational.org. You can also go to our website at apanational.org and see all the events that we have coming up. There are some that are with Diego Uchitel, and we have one with Art Streiber coming up, and then next month, Matthew Jordan Smith, and so really take a look at that. There's also one on digital asset management. There's one with Chicago Artist Perspectives that's happening in person later this month. And be sure to sign up for those. Membership really matters. So please, if you're not already a member, join APA. Our board is made up of photographers who volunteer to be part of our photographic community. And today we have National President of APA, Inti St. Clair. She's an award-winning lifestyle photographer based in both Austin and Seattle. And she mentors, she's very active on our diversity committee, the wellness committee, and various things that we've been working on for APA, and a very important part of our organization. And I appreciate her being here today. We have Stephen Doniger, who is a partner at Doniger Burroughs, a firm based in both Los Angeles and New York that focuses on copyright and intellectual property in particular. They work with photographers and artists, and really an important resource for APA photographers. They have an exceptional record of success in copyright and trademark litigation. If you need to reach Stephen, he's at donigerlawfirm.com. So if you've missed our past Legal Lounge series, you can look back. In February, we talked about hiring an attorney, things that you should know. In March, it was about posting on social media, understanding the licensing and user agreements. And next month, we're going to talk about the Copyright Claims Board, and if your work has been infringed upon, should you go to federal court or should you go to the CCB? And Stephen will help you understand when you would want to use either of those. The first thing he's going to tell you either way is register your images with the Copyright Office, because that's what matters most. So today we're going to be talking about artificial intelligence and how copyright is affected by that. So let me pass it over to Inti. And if you have questions, you can put things in the Q&A or in the chat, and I will either jump in and push those questions along, or we'll do them at the end. But we have a number of questions to get started right now. So thank you.
Thanks, Juliette. And hi, everybody. My name is Inti St. Clair, and I am the current acting president of APA National Board. And I can say that, yeah, this AI topic, it is hot. Everybody wants to know about it. And obviously, people are starting to play with it and not just incorporate it into their own workflows, but also create imagery that is that. And I'm sure, you know, if you pay attention to what's been going on, there are photographers who are being called out for not owning the fact that they've created AI imagery, and it's causing lots of turmoil. And so, you know, the generators that I know of are MidJourney, DALL-E, Stable Diffusion, and then if you've been paying attention, Adobe just announced their offering called Firefly, which I believe is still in beta, but will soon be incorporated in their suite of products. So this is very much the thing that everybody is wondering about. And obviously, there's a lot of questions surrounding that. And we are really fortunate to have somebody like Stephen Doniger to help us out and help us navigate how we can use this technology in our businesses and what the implications of that are. So Stephen, I think, you know, if you would like to introduce yourself, we'd love to have you do that, and then we'll just launch into the questions.
Sure, thank you so much. So my name is Steve Doniger of Doniger Burroughs, as Juliette said. We've been really privileged to work with APA for a long time and to work with a lot of photographers. And, I've been really proud of some of the work that APA has done and lobbying for legislative change and really trying to make sure that cutting edge issues like this are addressed from the perspective of photographers. And, I've been privileged to be able to participate in that. But while I'm not a technology expert by any stretch, our firm has had cases that have gone up at the appellate level, even at the Supreme Court, and we kind of keep abreast of kind of a copyright geek at heart. And so, I think as Inti had indicated, there's been a lot of buzz about this, and we've certainly been following what's been happening in the case law. So happy to share whatever I can with the photography community here, and thank you.
Great. So I think one of the big topics surrounding this is sourcing and where you get the pieces that you use to create AI imagery. And so is there like an ethical way to do that? And what do you think about, what are your thoughts on sourcing imagery? I mean, if you've also been paying attention, you know that Getty Images has filed this giant, like, $1 trillion potential lawsuit against Stable Diffusion, and because they're mad about their pictures being taken. And I personally would not love if other people were creating imagery based off of my images. So talk to us about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's so there's a concept of ethical sourcing, which really just is focused on exactly that, like where and how the data is gathered, who's gathering it, how, who's going to have access to it. And the major concern there is, the two major concerns are with, potential violations of privacy rights and with, using people's works in ways that, that they would not otherwise have authorized, especially as a data set to create other similar works. We'll talk about this a bit more when we get into some of the lawsuits that have been filed, but really like that, that is the question, is how similar, there's two issues. There's the input and there's the output. When you put these works, when you take works and you put them into a data set, you are making copies of them. And copyright law, as the name suggests, is literally the right to control who makes copies and under what circumstances. Now, there is a whole fair use issue that comes up, and that's something the courts are going to have to figure out. But that is the concern on the input side, and then on the output side, are you then going to create a work that is substantially similar? And it really is a question of how companies like Stable Diffusion work. When you've got a diffusion model, they learn to create images from these text prompts. And what they do is the models are trained to recreate images as opposed to really drawing something from scratch, or starting with pure noise and refining the image over time to make it incrementally closer to the text prompt. So when you're recreating images, it sort of begs the question, when are you essentially copying from the original works that go in, and when aren't you? There absolutely are ethical ways to use AI that don't raise these concerns. There's, as most of the photographers here probably know, there's a wide body of works that have been put in the public domain by their authors. There's you can also use your own works. There are a lot of photographers that, will an artist that'll use their own work, put it into the system and then have that be the data set. Of course, there's no real issue with that. So, without getting ahead of myself, and I think we've already touched on a bunch of other questions and topics that we'll be discussing, throughout this presentation, but that really is the question with open sourcing AI, is just trying to be aware of where the data comes from, making sure you're using things that you have a right to use, and that you're respecting the rights of other artists the way that you would want other artists to respect your rights.
Yes, and also people and their likeness and what you do with them. Like, I don't know if you saw the recent thing that came out with all the government officials, and like I don't even know how people can get away with doing that. I mean, how can you make a senator a drag queen and have that be okay and not get in trouble? Like I don't know.
Well, I think the question, and this is always this is always sort of a rub in where copyright law meets free speech, is this sort of sense of of using an image of someone for parody or for something that's not the original purpose. And so where things get really troubling is where you're not really sure if it's a parody. There was a really fantastic, for anyone who normally I wouldn't recommend a legal brief to anyone, but there was a really amazing amicus brief that was written to the Supreme Court, a brief that was written to the Supreme Court by The Onion, where they're talking about parody and how in order to be parody, you have to get really, really close to what's true, but then, have like a little sort of zinger at the end or whatever it is. But
that was wonderful.
Isn't that amazing?
That. And like,
we've had some great results. I've done some great work, and I read that and I thought to myself, I am never going to write anything this good.
Yeah. Truly, I agree. It was spectacular. 100%. It is the piece of legal whatever that I would recommend everybody read, because also you want to digest it because it is so entertaining and it really is so thought provoking and real. Okay, so I think a big question on a lot of people's minds are: will my images end up in a data share if I purchase a license to privately create on these platforms?
Yeah. And this is one of those questions that I wish I could give an easy yes or no answer to, but ultimately it really depends on the platform and the terms of service and, the zinger, which I'm sure a lot of photographers already know from their years of working with Instagram and other companies, is that those companies also reserve the rights to change their terms of service. So you've got to really be aware of what's going on. The thing that I can't recommend strongly enough, if you're going to get into this world and if you're really concerned about that, is just look closely at the terms of service for each, generative AI system that you use. MidJourney has different rights for paid versus unpaid users. OpenAI and DALL-E assign rights around, generated art to users while also, warning them of similar content and encourage due diligence to avoid infringement. And so each site is has its own sort of approach and its own rights that it reserves for itself and gives to its users. And then, as I said, that's always subject to change. So sorry for the non-answer.
Anyway, I just sign them. And I remember there was that big, public fervor about, Instagram, and they could use your images, and people care for a week and when it's in the media, and then they just forget about it and don't care anymore. But
the thing is,
really
I don't really think that's true. When that happened, that happened when a district court in New York had said that the terms of service basically allow third parties to embed publicly posted content. And that was we were involved. We were indirectly involved in that case and directly involved in another case that was pending at the same time, in which a different district court said, no, there's nothing in these terms of service that clearly gives any such right. And so, we reached out to the attorneys that were handling the first case and kind of shared with them our arguments, and they filed a motion for reconsideration. The court changed it. But while all of that was pending, because of this outcry, Instagram, if you recall, Instagram actually did issue a public statement saying, no, our terms of service were not meant to and shouldn't be interpreted to give anyone those rights. So those outcries, it's not like they happen and then they don't really have any consequence. It actually did in that case, and I think it will, it will moving forward.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I think that, in fact, in the AI world, Stability AI really, based on pressure from activists and content creators, Stability AI indicated that it plans to allow artists to opt out of the data set used to train next generation stable diffusion models. And that really is a reaction to the public outcry. So,
yeah, great. So next, this is sort of related. Another question we have is, if I use my own images for most of the image in an AI generator, does it make it ethical, and does it make it exclusively mine? I think we've, oh, sorry. Do you have anything else that you think you can add to that?
Well, yeah, the ethical we sort of addressed, but does it make it exclusively mine? This is where things get really interesting. And, I know the next topic on the list that APA put together is about registration. And so it actually feeds into that one really well, because works that are created by AI are not entitled to copyright protection. Like, the law has been clear for a long time that only works that are created by a human are entitled to copyright protection. There was some years back, there was that case about the macaw, monkey, the Naruto that took the selfie, and it was clear, like, no, it only works that are created by a human. And so the thing to be aware of is that if you have a particular style, of photograph, or if you're a fine artist or whatever, you've got a particular style of work, and you feed that in, and you create a whole bunch more similar works that are all created by the AI system using your data set. This is a really important thing to keep in mind. Those works are not going to be entitled to copyright protection. And so, the question, if I use my own images, to generate in an AI generator, is what comes out exclusively mine. It's really not. It's really, there's no copyright protection in it. And so people might end up finding, hey, I could be really prolific here and create a ton more work, a ton more, but they're not going to be able to enforce their copyrights in it.
So this whole copyright thing is really interesting, because a lot of people, I've seen a lot of chatter online, and a lot of people are like, but I spent hours and it was my prompts and it was this, and like, they're really trying to push hard for the fact that it was their influence in AI that made it theirs, and therefore they should be able to copyright it. And do you think that there will be lawsuits about surrounding this coming up?
So there might be, and to the artists that are using the AI, I understand their concerns, but the basic principles underlying the law really haven't changed in decades and decades and decades. And that is, if an artist is working with someone else, they're brought on as a contractor to do a job, and that somebody else says, oh, you know what, I want more light in that picture. I want more, can you bring in, you're taking a photograph of my living room, but can I get a whole bunch more flowers in the corner? And I'd like to see, some stuffed animal. And you're just, whatever you're like, your voice prompting, and then, the artist is staging it and taking the photograph. The copyright exists the moment that a work is what's called fixed in a tangible medium. So from a photographer's perspective, the moment you push that button, you capture that image, you own the copyright in it because you captured that image. It doesn't matter if someone else instructed you on like what to put in different places, or gave you sort of a sense of like the angle that they wanted the photo taken from, while when you're trying to do something for your customer. And in a sense, AI is really the same thing. You're telling it what to do, you're telling it what to create, you're giving it some reference, but it's the AI that's capturing it in the tangible medium. And so because of that, you're going to have the same problem. An artist is going to have the same problem claiming copyrights in that AI work that an artist's client might have trying to claim to be a co-owner of the artist's work, where the artist's customer had given them, directions or prompts or reference material or whatever else, right? So it's really the same thing. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Now the fact that the particular artwork isn't copyrightable doesn't mean it's impossible to get any copyright protection in it. There was anyone reading the news may have heard about, there's a New York-based artist, Chris, I don't remember her name right now, Kashtanova or something like that. And she was the first person to get a copyright registration over a graphic novel that featured AI generated images. Now, that was an interesting situation because she didn't initially disclose that it was AI generated. She initially filed an application for the, claimed that she was the author of the work. And then I don't know all the specifics of this, but I think she had posted something on social media that, this was done using AI, and it got back to the Copyright Office, and the Copyright Office, having issued the registration, came back to her and said, we're going to take another look at this, and we need you to answer some questions for us about what you did and what you didn't do, et cetera. And they ended up leaving the registration in place, but it was limited to the particular arrangement of these AI images and the text that she added, to create this graphic novel. The actual underlying images themselves, she couldn't claim a copyright in.
That is fascinating.
Yeah.
Very cool.
And then just not even a month ago, on March 15th of 2023, the Copyright Office announced that works created with the assistance of AI may be copyrightable, provided the work involves sufficient human authorship. So again, it's the same idea, right? Like if you've got something created with AI, but then there's human authorship in it as well, not just telling the AI what to do, you can get registrations for that. But it's where that line is certainly going to be the subject of some friction and
Yeah, I can see that. I think that's kind of what I was getting at is that type of creation. So what are the legal ramifications or possibilities of creating and selling imagery created in AI for commercial clients? And I think this would be very intensely related to copyright too, because if you're taking a base image and changing it and doing these things, the base image is the original copy holder, that's theirs. And if you're taking it and doing something else with it, can you sell that work commercially? And what does that look like?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And there's two different angles that I think we need to look at this from. The first is, well, both of those angles are you're gonna want to look to the agreement that you make with the person that you're selling this work to commercially. If I'm hired to create a series of images to be used in a national ad campaign by a major client, I mean, if that's what you mean by commercial client, most likely, in most of the agreements that I've seen, there is, the artist is guaranteeing, is representing that whatever they create is going to be their original work. And they're either agreeing to transfer the copyright in it to the client, or they're agreeing that they have the copyright in it, such that the client can be sure that when they do this big ad campaign, no one else can then just take and use that same image.
Or sue them.
So the first part is making sure that they have exclusivity in their right to use the image. The second part, what I was about to get to, is yes, about being sued, making sure that you can represent and warrant that that the image that is being delivered is one that is not going to subject them to lawsuits. And artists have to be really careful about this, because most contracts with commercial clients are going to include the commercial clients are going to insist on defense and indemnification agreements, where it's like, okay, if you've been using if you're giving us an image that actually infringes on someone else's rights, you're going to have to be responsible for that. And those can get really, really, really expensive when you pursue those infringement claims.
I guess to clarify this question a little bit more. So say I take a picture of my daughter in our garden, and then I want to add, some fairies and some whatever, and I create this AI generated image. Can I take that to a commercial client and have them license it because I created the original image and I can sign a release for my daughter?
Yeah, again, anyone else would be free to use, the fairies to the extent that those are created by AI. And and to your point earlier, if those fairies end up being, near verbatim copied from someone else's images of fairies that were fed into this AI system, there may be a claim for indemnification. So, you want to make sure that you're not either in breach of your agreement with your client, that you're giving them the appropriate rights, and you want to make sure that you're not subjecting your client to liability.
Super sticky.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not that risky. It's actually, it's pretty rare that these data sets, that the output will be, really, a 1-for-1 or something, very, very close to it. It's certainly not impossible. I mean, it's happened. There was recently, I think there was an AI tool used by CNET to write explanatory articles at one point was found to have plagiarized articles written by humans, articles that were presumably, swept up into its training data set. There's also an academic study that was published, I think, back in December that found that image generating AI models like, DALL-E 2 and Stable Diffusion can and do replicate at least aspects of the images from their training data. And so, that's the thing. Like part of what I do as a copyright attorney dealing with litigation cases is we take, often artwork or photographs, we've done this a lot with artwork where someone actually intentionally changes the artwork to hide the piracy, but there's certain aspects of the artwork that aren't changed while other aspects are. And you can then still do that one-for-one overlay, right? And see that aspect of it remain unchanged. And then you can see what was changed. And that's the thing to look out for. It's like when these, AI generated images do have aspects of images from their training set that are virtually unchanged in them, when it just sort of begs the question, when will those aspects be enough to create substantial similarity of protectable artistic expression that can serve as the basis of a copyright infringement claim? It doesn't happen all the time at all. It doesn't happen much, but it certainly can happen.
So William McLeod asked, is AI insurance about to become a thing? Could you get insurance that would protect you if you did use AI?
So that's a really good question. And I don't know the answer, but I think it's going to depend on the nature of the business and the nature of the insurance policy. We deal with insurance companies a lot anytime someone can tender a case to insurance, they do. Most insurance companies, at least in terms of general, sort of business, commercial, general liability, have exclusions for copyright infringement, but then they have advertising injury claims. And so it really just sort of depends on the terms of the policy. There are insurance companies that have, copyright coverage. It just depends on the policy. And so as a general rule, I suppose that is something that could come into play, but, I don't have a better answer.
And Christina Krug asked, if regarding cases of infringement, is there a case or an argument that creates a parallel with music sampling, collage, and parody are concerning arguments for AI?
So there's a couple different questions wrapped up in there. And as we get into the lawsuits that have been filed, one of the things that we'll discuss is that fair use is probably the primary defense. And whether or not something is fair use or parody, that's a question that's in the Supreme Court right now, is taking a look at what the relevant standard is for fair use. And in the Warhol versus Goldsmith case, and is looking at what constitutes transformative. And does it simply mean that you have some new meaning or message, or like when is something an unauthorized derivative? When is it a transformative fair use? Those are things that the courts are still working out, and it's always risky to put your eggs in the fair use basket, unless it's a clear parody. Parody is one of those things that if you can fall into parody, it's almost like the get out of jail free card, no matter what. So, but most of these uses aren't.
So I think a lot of people have questions surrounding fine art and, can you create a print? Can you of AI and sell it as art? I'm assuming people also want to know, can you create a piece of AI art and sell it as an NFT? And someone who's attending said, questions. They said, what would be the implications of selling an AI image as fine art? What if Inti's image of her daughter in the garden with fairies? And then to clarify, what if Inti was selling that image of her daughter as fine art, partly my image and partly AI created? And are there indemnification issues in this case?
So there were about 6 questions in there.
Fine art. Can we do it?
So the thing about fine art that I think is necessarily going to be a bit concerning for artists is, how do you command a high price for something that anyone else can then just take and replicate and assuming that they can get their hands on, on a high resolution copy, print on, print on a, canvas, and now it's, and start mass producing. Like that's really the issue here, I think. Can you do it? Of course you can, but once you're, someone looks at a gallery full of images and, they're like, okay, well, why am I going to spend, $50,000 on that when I can, and take my own photo, or take, or really just generate my own image. I mean, if I could figure out what, a description, right, of what you use to create your AI that you want to use as fine art, like I can go type the same thing in and see what I get, and and there you go. There were a bunch more questions in there that I'm not remembering what all of them were. If you want to break them down, I'm happy to go through and make sure I answer all of them.
I think in general that covers it. I mean, I'm assuming that I could obviously create an AI image and sell it as a fine art print, although the quality is pretty diminished once you run it through all these AI generators at this point. I'm sure that will change. I could also sell it as an NFT. There's no reason why not. But to your point, and I've seen examples of this where people have taken an actual photograph, of a, I saw some that were like landscapes, and it was like, the certain lake in a certain part of the world with certain very distinguishing features and shot in certain kind of light, et cetera, et cetera. And they then went to an AI generator and described that picture, and then wanted to see how close it created something out of nothing to get to that picture. And it was astonishingly good. And we are in the infancy of these AI generators. So yeah. I presume that it's only going to get much better. And so to your point, someone could see that image of mine with the fairies and go, oh, this is great, but she wants to charge $10,000. I'm just going to go to this AI generator and describe the heck out of that picture until I get exactly that. And I do think that that will be possible, honestly.
But they couldn't use your portion of it, right? So the photo of your daughter part they couldn't use.
But they can get awfully close by describing, the features and the hair and the light shining from every direction. And it's really possible to get very close.
Right.
And it's only going to become more possible, I think. So anyway, hopefully that answers the questions that other people had. AI generators, I mean, are they able to copy the style of a photographer by name? They're able to copy painters. They're certainly going to be able to copy styles. I mean, if you are a famous photographer, and especially if you are also a photographer who starts putting your work into these generators, it's learning constantly. So it's going to learn styles, right? I mean, that seems.
Yeah, I mean, this is very specifically happened with a number of graphic artists who have, very particular styles, where people have asked for, like something created in the style of a particular artist, and, AI generators have done it. There's a bunch of those artists are really up in arms because they're like, okay, you're now going to flood the market with things that look like my work. And to the extent that there's like any kind of a scarcity issue that drives, the cost of something, it's just, it's very much the same conversation, as the fine art conversation we were having a moment ago.
This is related. If an AI image cannot be copyrighted because it is not made by a human, is that image free to take and use as you please?
Short answer, yes.
What can you do if someone is posting AI images using your name?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm not sure what this means, because the AI image is necessarily going to be created by a computer, but the answer, and if I'm not, if there's a more specific question you want answered, let me know. But I think, generally the answer is going to depend on the state you're in, right? Most states have rights of publicity, which protect the right to, the exclusive right of someone to control their name, voice, likeness, image. In California, where I am, the Civil Code Section 3344 is the main statute. And it runs very much like the Copyright Act, where if there's a violation of your right of publicity, you can seek any actual damages or profits that are made using your name, plus you can seek your attorney's fees. Not all states have the same law as California, but your general rule is you're going to look to the right of publicity or right of privacy statutes, which vary slightly from state to state.
Right. Since I wrote that question, I'll explain it. I was thinking, if you were the photographer whose name is being used to create a style and everybody recognizes it has this particular photographer's style, but this other person has created this AI, is there anything you as a photographer recognizing your style, you can tell what prompt they use the way the illustrator might. Is there anything you can do about it except ask that they don't use it?
Yeah, I mean, other than the unauthorized use of someone's name, if you're talking about a style, that becomes a very different question. For anyone who followed the Blurred Lines case some years ago, there was like all this whole big debate about, can a style of music or like a groove be protectable as as like a vibe or a feel of the music. And now you're kind of talking about the same thing with regard to artwork, right? Like the particular vibe or feel of the artwork. And that's challenging because that is something that's not usually, protected by copyright law.
What are the legal implications of posting AI-generated art on your social media channels or even your own website?
So the legal implications are, there's a bit of overlap here with some of our other discussion. If you're posting something that, unbeknownst to you, is copying elements, substantially copying elements from, source artwork that's in the data set, you may be violating someone's copyright. Copyright law is often described as a bundle of rights. It's like almost like a bundle of sticks, and like each stick is a separate right. And those rights include the right to make copies, include the right to distribute, the right to publicly display, the right to, there's just a bunch of rights that go into these bundle of rights that a copyright holder has. And so if what you're posting, once you post it, like you are publicly displaying, an infringing work, if it's an infringing work. Now it's probably not, again, because it doesn't happen that often that works are copied that closely, but that really is the question. And whether it's fair use, like all of those things are going to are all part of what's being litigated right now. Which I guess brings us to lawsuits around AI, if that's
go for it.
Yeah. So there's at least 3 lawsuits that I'm aware of dealing with AI. Microsoft, GitHub, and OpenAI are currently being sued in class action that accuses them of violating copyright law by allowing a code generating AI system called Copilot, to train on billions of lines of public code. And which have been shown to then regurgitate license code snippets without providing any credit. There's another case against MidJourney and Stability AI that alleges that they're infringing on the rights of millions of artists by training their tools on web scraped images. And then, as we discussed, there's the Getty case against Stability AI for reportedly using millions of images from its site without permission to train stable diffusion, which we've talked about. Most of those cases are addressing the use without permission in the training sets, right? Like that's really what most of these cases are dealing with. And ultimately the main defense is fair use. And as I think we touched on earlier, the Supreme Court, years ago in the Campbell case said, well, if the purpose, if it's for, well, I mean, there's a whole bunch of cases basically that say that since Campbell that all reiterate that if something is for a different purpose, if you're creating artwork, to show the contents of it and to license it and sell it for certain uses, and someone else is taking the content and using it for, educational reference purposes, that can be fair use. And that's exactly what the argument is they're making, is that this is, if you're going to have an AI system and you're going to ask that AI system to do, drawings of penguins, they have to know what penguins look like. And they have to have like a big data set of penguins to see the different shapes and sizes. And so that they can then just create something based on, that's going to be recognizable as a penguin. And so really like, that's what we, like, it's going to be very interesting to see how those cases, play out.
For sure. So other questions that people have are, if you change the faces on a picture you took of a person with AI, can you use it commercially? I'm not sure exactly what that means. I'm guessing like they're saying if you take a picture and then you alter the people's faces using AI, can you use it commercially? I think that's what that says. Which I would think you no longer really have the copyright, right?
Well, no, I mean, if all you've done is change the faces and the bodies and the way that you capture the bodies and the relationship to other things and the lighting and everything else in the photo is your work, you still have the right to protect your work. You just don't have a right to protect the faces.
The faces. So yeah.
So if I were to take those faces and create a polka dot design and sell it on, polka dot dresses in Nordstrom, that each polka dot is an AI generated face, there's really not much you can do about that. But I don't know who wants to buy that anyway.
Somebody does. It's cats, they definitely do. So would it be legal to place a copyright notice on an AI image when no copyright will actually be issued for that image?
Yeah, so there's not, I mean, I'm not aware of any law that says that it's illegal and you're not going to get a ticket from the authorities, for a fine from the authorities for putting a copyright notice on something you don't have a copyright on, but it's just not going to do anything for you if it,
I think it would be maybe the person who wrote this is thinking, oh, well, it would be a deterrent for someone to like take that image and do something with it because they don't know any better and they think it is copyrighted. I don't know.
Maybe. And that really is the thing, right? Like, unless you disclose to someone that you generated an image using AI, like they may not know.
Right.
So.
And that's a huge point of discussion right now for sure. Because do you need to be concerned that AI created people are actually real people that could seek legal damages?
Yeah. I mean, my answer is not overly, right? Just because like, there might be, maybe you have a photograph of yourself on Facebook and then you see an image that's generated on AI that shows an image of someone that looks a lot like you, then seems to be, standing in a similar way to your photo on Facebook. And you're like, hey, that looks like a copy of my image. Establishing that image was in the data set, right, is not always the easiest thing to do. And then, there's also this concept of independent creation, right? Like let's say that I am drawing, I'm an artist, right? I'm an artist and I'm drawing, your sort of, quintessential, fruit bowl. And in the course of my life, like I've looked at 15,000 photographs of fruit bowls, right? If I sit down and out of my mind, like create a fruit bowl, and it turns out that fruit bowl looks remarkably similar to another fruit bowl that I had seen, just because I saw the other fruit bowl doesn't mean I copied it. Like at some point, the subject matter, like people are going to look similar. Like I get told all the time, oh, you look just like so-and-so. Like I've got doppelgangers all over the world, apparently. So these are just sort of the questions and the issues that you have to wrestle with. But, if you can establish this photograph of me was in this data set and the output is me and that's me, as opposed to just someone with similar features and characteristics, then maybe. But this is all untested stuff that, hasn't, no one can point to a case and be like, in this case, the court held, it hasn't happened yet, so.
Yeah. So William McLeod asks, with respect to copyright, you're basically saying that if you use AI, anyone can take and use your art and sell your art, etc., unless LOC. I don't know what LOC means. Do you guys know what LOC means? He wrote it in all caps. Lets you copyright it at some point.
Library of Congress.
Oh, yes, thank you. I mean, I think that, yeah, they can sell it as art, right?
Well, so there's a premise in the question that it's your art, right? Like the way the question's written is like, they could take your art. Well, the whole problem is it's not your art. It's created by AI.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I wonder, I mean, if AI companies will start who knows, that's a whole other question.
I love Natter's question because it's something that Steve and I were discussing. Is there anything we can do to protect ourselves in our terms and conditions when licensing our images to our clients?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. We talked earlier about fair use, and that fair use really is the main defense that AI companies are going to make. There's 4 fair use factors, and the last fair use factor, the first one is transformative, and the 4th one is whether or not the use would hurt a viable licensing market, like hurt a market for the work. There's at least one photographer that I know who on his website states specifically that any of his photographs on there are available for license, including to AI companies that want to use it, as part of their data set. By including language like that, you indicate that there is a licensing market for the use of your image in a data set, such that the use in a data set without licensing it, you feed into the factor that makes it, the last factor, which may be the most important one in the court's determination of whether or not it's fair use. Because what courts really don't want to do is step on the toes of professionals and take away money from them from viable licensing markets. So the more the courts are likely to find that the use of images and data sets like this really isn't a licensing market that photographers or other artists, would play in, for lack of a better term, the more likely it is to find it's fair use. And the more likely the courts are to find that artists would license their works into these data sets, the more likely they are to find it's not fair use. It's not a determinative factor by itself, but it's an important thing. And then the other thing that I would say to protect yourself is keep checking the websites of these AI companies and make sure that, make sure you know what your rights are. Make sure, like, as we mentioned before, Stability AI is going to allow artists to opt out of the data sets used to train, their next stable diffusion model, then opt out. There's a little bit of awareness that just needs to, if this is a concern of yours, there's just a little bit of awareness that you need to make sure that you have of what your options are.
So related question, and there's a bunch of other good questions I want to get to as well, but this one seems related, is if I link to pieces of my original work to have MidJourney or other generators, combine them with AI, am I giving them permission to use those pieces of my original images in the future in other people's works?
So I don't know the terms. I'm not as familiar with the terms of service of every one of these agents companies as I could be. You're going to have to look at the terms of service. This is the sort of thing where, when people post to Instagram or they post to TikTok or they post to wherever they post, there's a question, what rights am I giving up? And again, the rights you're giving up really depend on what those terms of service say. And just as an analogy, when you post in TikTok makes sure that once you post on there, you not only give TikTok a license to use the work, but you give anyone else using TikTok a right to use your work and incorporate into other videos only to be used on the TikTok platform, because that's what TikTok is trying to do and encourage. Whereas Twitter, or Instagram, we discussed before, said, no, you still need to get permission from the original owner. We Instagram, have a license and a right to sub-license the use of your work if you post it on a platform, but third parties still need to get your permission. So each, I suspect very similarly, each of these sites, as they develop and as they realize quite frankly, what they can get away with, in the court of public opinion, they're going to alter and tweak their terms of service, and you really have to, keep abreast of what it is that they say you can do, and understand that that's what you're agreeing to when you use the platform.
Sorry, unmute. What steps do people take now to create their own photography and their value as a photographer? Wow, that's a big question. I think what people want to know is, how do they protect their photography in the realm of AI? And you touched on this a little bit before, but is there a way to prevent people from using your photography in AI?
So there's a lot about AI that is new and novel, and there's a lot about it that's not. And I think that in order to answer this particular question, I want to make sure that everybody listening understands a fundamental principle of copyright law, which is that you can't protect an idea. You can only protect a particular artistic expression of an idea. And even then, if I decide to go down to, my office is in Venice, California. If I decide to go down to the Venice Pier at sunset and take a picture, out as the sun is setting, and try to capture like a sailboat in the upper left corner, and it's this brilliant photo, it's not like someone else can't go out and take a virtually identical photo, a week later, and just wait for the sun and the plane to be, lined up the same way. That's sort of the same issue. When people ask me about protecting their photographs and protecting their work, I can't answer that question without making sure that we draw this distinction between what is protectable and what's not. And your photograph, what you captured, what you fixed in a tangible medium, is protectable, but it's never going to stop someone else from being able to, if they want, go out and create their own work that, is at some level recreating the idea of your photograph. And to the extent that that's what AI is doing, there's not a whole lot you're going to be able to do to stop it. To the extent AI is copying, your particular photograph or some elements thereof, there is. And if there's a more specific question, I'm happy to answer it, but just big picture, I think that distinction just has to be really made clear.
Yeah, here's another question. If AI made artwork that took recognizable elements like an eye from Pablo Picasso painting or a melting clock from DALL-E, can that person that generated the final image be sued? Obviously, those artists are dead, but by the people who represent the copyright of those works for using elements of their artwork, or does this come under fair use?
Yeah, so copyright protects a work for the life of the artist plus 70 years, generally speaking. So when you talk about a Picasso or a DALL-E, that's all in the public domain at this point. There's no claim for using that. But if the point of the question is to ask whether or not anyone listening in here, anyone alive today, can bring a claim when something recognizable from their work is taken, the answer is absolutely yes. And even the estate can, once they pass, as long as it's still within the life of the copyright.
And John Merrick asked, let's say you create an AI image and use it for inspiration to take a photo. That new photo you could copyright, correct?
Yep. That new photo would presumptively be a work of original authorship that's by a human that's entitled to copyright protection.
I've heard of a lot of chatter about agency creatives using AI to create storyboards to pitch campaigns that they're then going to have shot.
Mhm.
So that
Happens all the time.
Yep, for sure. Yeah. I think we are reaching the end of our time. We don't really have any other questions directly related to AI in our Q&A. Is there anything else, Stephen, that you feel like we should know as image creators?
Anytime something new like this comes along, there's always a whole lot of concern about what it means. And, there's the one takeaway that I want people to get out of today is that a lot of those concerns really are addressed by existing copyright law. And to the extent that there aren't, no one's going to be able to come along and say, well, this is exactly what the courts are going to find. There are a bunch of open questions that the courts are going to have to wrestle with. And it's going to be interesting. But in the meantime, just know that that the work of original artists is always going to have a premium and a value, especially in the commercial context, because that's the only world in which those works can be protected by copyright. And so that's a good thing.
And if you want to learn more about registering your copyright, Stephen did a whole webinar on that. That's on the APA national site. You can link to it. It's on the YouTube channel under American Photographic Artists, so you can find it there.
And that is there'll be best practices in there and all that kind of stuff.
And I just want to add, Brian Carlson said, hearing a lawyer say vibe is a highlight of my day.
We only associate with cool lawyers, that's it.
So thank you very much. I know next month it's about whether once you've been infringed upon and you want to take it to court, if you should go to federal court or the CCB. So that's going to be an important one. So second Tuesday next month.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you guys so much. Always a pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for being here.
Have a great day, everyone.